just 10 to 12 minutes of sunlight, just for your face and hands will give you about 40,000 international unit free vitamin D.
Hey, good afternoon, Mudwater. My name is Brian Prosek, reaching out to you from sunny Silicon Valley. I am currently at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Palo Alto, where in the FOR program, which is Foundations of Recovery, I am working on my mental health issues as well as substance use disorders, and wanted to reach out and let you know that I really appreciate the Trends with Benefits blog, as well as your podcast. I find them super informative, and I definitely look forward to putting Mudwater into my daily routine as I move forward towards a happier and healthier me. So thank you for all that you do, and take care.
Hey, Brian, thanks for sending that in. Stoked to hear that you are digging the podcast as well as trendswithbenefits.com. We've got some damn good writers over there, and every week we publish stories about psychedelics, adventure, well-being. So you can head over to trendswithbenefits.com or sign up for the newsletter, and we will send these beautiful stories straight to your inbox, because who doesn't need more emails, am I right? Hey, everyone. My name is Kyle Tierman. Thank you for letting me into your head. This episode of the podcast is with Dr. Ted Achacoso. Dr. Ted is a polymath who has one of the highest IQs ever measured. At least at the time that it was measured, it was among the world's top 5. He is an internationally renowned anti-aging physician who created health optimization medicine, a clinical framework for optimizing health. He's also a former computational neuroscientist who has had pioneering contributions to neuroscience, AI, and wireless communication technology. He's also an advanced meditator and psychedelic aficionado. Before we get this going, I want to say I love getting all these voice memos from you guys. Super fun. So we'd love to hear more from you. Just let us know who you are, where you are, something you're psyched about, and some details about your surroundings. Keep it under a minute. Record it on your phone. Email it to podcast@mudwtr.com. And if we play it on the show, we'll ship you a free box of mud. So hey, win-win. And I hope that you all enjoy this episode with Dr. Ted Achacoso. Have a great day.
Good. I'm microdosed today, so we're good.
Great. What are you microdosing on right now?
I'm Mondays and Thursdays are my microdose days for LSD.
For LSD. And how much do you take, and what is the what's the benefit?
10 micrograms. The tripping dose is 100. Right, so a microdose is 1/10 of a tripping dose. So for LSD, it's 10 micrograms, which is, if properly diluted, it's just barely a drop. It allows you to think beyond the box. But in fact, there is no box. You take it for creative solutions. I'm actually currently writing a virtual lecture on nootropics, or things that make your brain work better, faster. And one of the things that is certain about there is, the use of psychedelics. And if you microdose them, then you get into this, it's subperceptual. You don't get high or anything like that. It's just that you're able to take a look at other solutions that are otherwise not available to you. The next day you close up again. Your ego comes back online and says, well, but it already has the solutions to the problems that you're working on. So it's pretty good in terms of being able to loosen the grip of the brain on what can and cannot be done as regards an issue you're trying to solve, right? But it's been if combine it with something like something that prevents the degradation of dopamine is a neurotransmitter for focus. and that's produced by the brain. And if you prevent the enzyme that sort of like recycles it, right, from recycling it, then you will have a little bit higher levels of dopamine, and you could focus a little bit more. So that's a good balance that I try to do on heavy working days like this one, where you have to deal with patients, and then you have to deal with creating lectures, and then to transition into an audience that's really curious, and to simplify it for them. The best skill that any one can have as a teacher, right, is to be able to explain it to someone like a 5-year-old. If you can't do that, then you need you need some explaining yourself. Anyway.
Is there anything else that you are using to supplement your microdose of LSD? As I said, I take 1/4 tablet of selegiline. That's a prescription, though, and I'm a doctor. I have a prescription for it. It's actually an anti-aging doctor. It's actually one of those that they say that after you're 50 years old, you can start taking selegiline twice a week, because your dopamine production actually goes down as you get older. What people fail to acknowledge is that as we get older, our enzymatic systems, the systems that actually either produce, like the thyroid hormone, right, that either produce the hormones for us or cleave them to active forms, meaning, like, for example, thyroid hormone will be cut from 4 iodines to 3 iodines to make it active, right? And my example for that is, my analogy for that is like you have money in the bank, but you have to withdraw the money, right? So, and the act of withdrawal is actually facilitated by enzymes. And it's the same thing with transmitters in the brain, because these are the things that, these are the molecules that are responsible for the message passing, right? And so for me, since microdosing of LSD, for example, will raise, they activate a receptor that is actually a serotonin receptor, and serotonin, as in the public knows, your feel-good receptor and so on. So for me, you have to balance that a little bit with something. You don't want to feel too good. You also want to be able to focus on what you're doing. And so I balance those two, and it's been my go-to. For me, for other people, it's other types of combinations. For other people, their microdose would be magic mushrooms, right? Or psilocybin mushrooms, which has been, I'm currently in Washington, D.C., and it's just been decriminalized here. So the tripping dose for that is 2 to 5 grams, right? And so the 1/10 of that will be 200 milligrams to 500 milligrams. But I swear I'm a coal man in the I'm the canary in the coal mine here. Give me 500 milligrams and I'm off to La La Land. So I'm really be very careful when you try to microdose this stuff. You have to find your level of comfort. Yeah. Of course. I've had Dr. Jim Fadiman on this podcast a lot.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Do you know Jim?
No, I heard of his story during a round table once, where he basically said, I just said the following and suddenly it's become gospel. That's actually pretty good for him. It's like then suddenly he said, why don't you try this and why don't you try that, and suddenly people basically protocolize the whole thing, right? But I do find it his suggestions actually quite useful for me, at least. In terms of that.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, he wrote the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, and I grew up in Santa Cruz, California. I listened to an interview that he did on Tim Ferriss's show, and then learned that he lived in Santa Cruz. I dug a little bit deeper and learned that he had a house right next to my favorite surf spot growing up. And I had biked past his house probably 1,000 times before I ended up having him on my podcast. And I really appreciated how much, how he considers himself a real right-wing psychonaut in the way that he's, if there can be one, he's very conservative in his approach, and like you, is very calculated. He understands that there's incredible potential with these compounds, and also they should be treated with that kind of scientific respect.
Yeah, I am trained in pharmacology, so I like to tease people that I know how to calculate for my poisons, because anything that you put in your body, can turn toxic, right? So even natural foods. Even vitamin A, for example, at very high doses. There are doses like this. But the thing about health, Kyle, and this is the reason why I started the whole clinical practice called health optimization medicine and practice. And health optimization medicine is for doctors. Health optimization practice is for health practitioners, like gym coaches and all of that. The reason that I started that is that health, unlike disease, is a very individual thing. You're a surfer, you know that your surfing ability is really a very individual thing, right? Your preparation, etc., etc. It's, of course, one of the most Zen activities that you could ever do, which is, the ultimate tests for patience is waiting for the wave, right? Until you're not impatient anymore and you begin to enjoy the wave. But there are different thresholds for that, and it's the same way with health. When you go to an illness medicine doctor, essentially they diagnose and treat disease. So when you go to them, as your listeners will know, they will get things like blood sugar and your hemoglobin and so on. These are what are considered as disease markers. Okay, there are markers for disease. They have a cutoff for them. For example, for your blood sugar is greater than 94, then that's already high. It was funny because 10 years ago I was screaming that the cutoff for medicine for blood sugar of 105 was too high. We should cut it lower, and then several years later they came down to what I was saying. It's just 94 should be a good cutoff level. But this here you're looking at disease, right? When you're looking at health optimization, you're suddenly not looking at diagnosing and treating a disease, but it's like having a car, right? And when you have a car, essentially your gauges will show that, hey, you need air in this rear tire, and you need to change oil, and you need this and you need that. The car is working fine, right? So in medicine, we are actually taught how to repair, right? Which is the body, or repair a car, right? It's either overheated, or we need to do a transplant. You have to change the entire wheel, for example, in a flat tire. That's what we know how to do in medicine, which is equivalent of giving drugs or doing surgery, right? But we don't know how to maintain the car. And that's the whole purpose of my starting health optimization medicine. In other words, the technology now exists where we can test for the levels of the vitamins, minerals, cofactors that you have. The question before that I usually got is like, doctor, is vitamin E good for me, or is vitamin C good for me, and so on. Those questions are no longer questions because we can measure those levels now. The technology exists to measure them. So my answer is, get them measured. If you need them, get them. We give them to you. And then if you don't need them, then we don't give them to you, right? So if you see these magazine articles like this is the best vitamin for you and that's the best vitamin for you, that's what I really hate, because the technology now exists, that we could measure them now. The whole field, and this is probably a new word for your listeners, is called metabolomics. And it's like, it's one of the omics. If genes have genomics, and people are familiar with that, right? The DNA, the genome. There's also much as there's a human genome database, there's also a human metabolome database, meaning these are the metabolites that are produced by your body. These are molecules produced by your body when it's functioning. Like, for example, when you eat carbohydrates, and it has glucose, right? And when your glucose is broken down into energy, it will produce certain metabolites, and you could measure those metabolites now. In other words, we now have the capacity to look inside the cells and measure the levels. Look, Kyle, when I was in medical school, we simply had to memorize all this stuff, right? Because there was no way you could measure them, and therefore you say, well, maybe he lacks vitamin B1 or thiamine, and now you could actually go, oh shit, your vitamin B1 level is really very low. That's why you're experiencing all of this fatigue, etc. Because B as a general class of vitamins are the energy vitamins, right? So you could see that. You could also see, doctors right now who are not practicing health optimization, they actually say, oh, omega-3s are good for you, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, you could already see the levels of omega-3s now. Unlike before, you had to guess, right? But now you could see the measure of that. You can measure omega-3 fats, omega-6 fats. And guess what I'm getting now? I'm getting patients or clients are not sick, where their omega-3 level is just way too high, such that they actually their omega-6 levels are really very low. And that's the point. The main point when you try to do health optimization is you try to actually take a look at everything as a network. In a network, when you touch one thing, another thing moves, right? And your listeners will know this because in the winter, they may take a lot of zinc gluconate, zinc lozenges, right, to prevent cold. Guess what? When you take too much of that, the body knows how to compensate. It will dump a lot of your copper, right? So there's a called a zinc copper balance, right? And for example, those bodybuilders, who like to have the muscular pump, they take a lot of arginine, right, to boost the nitric oxide and improve blood flow, etc. It also improves your erections and so on. Guess what happens if you have if you're prone to canker sores? And so on, you will drop the lysine levels in your blood, and lysine is another amino acid, in your blood. It is balanced off by arginine, right? You will drop it, and then your canker sores will appear. So. These are the kinds of things that the body does. It's always in a network. Even with hormones, for example, you may know of a few men who are in testosterone replacement therapy. I don't advocate, for example, pure testosterone replacement therapy. You have to take a look at the entire network of hormones, at least the major ones, from the growth hormone to the melatonin to the thyroid hormones, your protective thymosins, your pancreatic hormones, your cortisol for stress. These are all working with each other, and the nice thing about it is that they help each other out, right? Because some hormones build and some hormones would destroy, and that's actually the definition of health, right? Is the maintenance of the balance between anabolic processes, meaning processes that build, and catabolic processes and processes that destroy in the body according to your age. So kids have a lot more of anabolic processes, right? And then for the elderly, they have more of catabolic processes. So what do we do is, in terms of maintenance, is try to keep you right at that balance, right? Using appropriate levels of vitamins, minerals, cofactors, etc. And how do we do that? Well, we measure the levels of your vitamins, minerals, cofactors, and then we move them as a group, right? As I just said, you cannot just raise one value. You have to raise the entire value to the level when you were between 21 to 30 years old. How old are you now? How young are you now, Kyle?
I'm 30.
You're right there, beginning.
I'm right
that's
on the
when
edge.
testosterone begins to drop, man.
Oh no!
And that's why I chose 30, because it's actually in men. They begin to drop at age 13. It's a very slow decline, unlike in women where, the menopause happens usually suddenly and they get these hot flashes, etc. In men, I usually find them at around age 40 in my clinic, and they are depressed. They're some sort of antidepressant. They're angry and so on. And when you take a look at their hormonal levels, and especially their testosterone, is actually down. And after about 3 months of balancing their nutrients and hormones, it's as if, nothing happened. They return to their wives if they have, other women. And that's why other women hate me, because the balance is there. Either I shift you back to between your levels between 21 and 30, because those are the optimal ages, right? For the levels of your vitamins, cofactors, minerals, and hormones. And or I shift you to what's called an evolutionary value. And an evolutionary value is something that has already been placed there by evolution. For example, for vitamin D. Everyone knows vitamin D as a vitamin, but it's not. It's actually a hormone, right? And if you take a look at the Maasai tribes in Africa, essentially what you'd see is that they have vitamin D levels around 50 and above. And you see that the cancer rates are very low, and are even non-existent. And so is metabolic diseases like diabetes and so on. In fact, you're lucky because you love to surf, and you get lots of sunlight. Right, you get lots of sunlight, and in a summer's day, that really depends on your latitude. But on a summer's day, for example, in the tropics, I work in Asia 30 days every quarter, and when you are in the tropics, just 10 to 12 minutes of sunlight, just for your face and hands, will give you about 40,000 international units free vitamin D, right? So that's the and I noticed that for my my patients and clients who have very high levels of vitamin D, even if they're smokers. I had this female who was a smoker and so on, but she was not feeling a lot of the inflammatory side effects of smoking and so on. And what I realized she was doing was that at noon she would walk around her building sleeveless, while smoking. So she was actually walking around the block. And exposing herself to sunlight.
Fighting the negative effects of smoking without even knowing it.
Yeah, so that's the essence. I started this kind of practice, Kyle, about 11 years ago, because there were so many developments in areas like, for example, the name for the specialty for sleep is chronobiology, right? The rhythms of your body, and how they're essential not only to memory and your well-being, but also to the fact that sleep would clear out the gunk in your brain, right? There's a newly discovered system. For example, it was only discovered. The paper came out only like in 2012. So that's only about 8 years old, right? That there's a system in our brain which we thought didn't exist before. It's equivalent of the lymphatic system of the body, where the brain cells actually take out the garbage, right? And therefore, adequate sleep is actually useful. Well, we didn't know this, right? And so we can also take a look at what's called the inflammatory markers. They're called cytokines, right? These are molecules that are either pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, and you could see their balance. And you see that if you lack sleep, you see your inflammatory cytokines go up. The body has natural ways of balancing this, right? It's just the body is not just used to chronic stress, right? In fact, when I tell my clients, I can maintain your levels of hormones, nutrients to between 21 and 30 or to the appropriate evolutionary value. But, that doesn't mean that you're going to drive your car in the highway all the time. You may be the type who actually drives it roughshod over rough roads all the time. And that's your lifestyle, right? And so, the only thing that we can do there is actually support you because that's the lifestyle that you want. But in the end, what's missing in a lot of health advice that's being given out there is, where's the measurement, right? Where's the measurement of that, and how does the current measurement, change, from one time to the other. This field now, and the field is called epigenetics, right? And epigenetics is all of those things that influence your genes that are not DNA itself. And, there are, we always think that DNA is regulated by DNA, but actually, no, the DNA is actually coiled in proteins called histones. And those are actually marked. If you need, for example, a protein or something, those can be marked, right? And those segments can also be silenced. Like, for example, if you live the proper life and you're say prone to a certain cancer gene, living a healthy lifestyle might be able to silence that gene. And one of the things that beneficial effects is, which we didn't know before, again, is that these epigenetic marks can be inherited by your kids, right? So now it is a non-genetic inheritance. And my favorite slide when I explain epigenetics to people is that, if you're a mother and you're smoking, you're basically affecting 3 generations: yourself, your unborn baby, and the kids of your unborn baby. So this is 3 generations down.
Even if you're not smoking while pregnant?
The changes have already occurred, right, while you were smoking. But if you had a period whereby you actually cleaned up your act before getting pregnant, then chances are, you will have erased those epigenetic effects. The nice thing about it, Kyle, and these are new tests again, is that there are now epigenetic tests that are available, that they came available only like last year, so you could see your the way they do this is the way I like to say it is the way David Sinclair likes to say it. It's like as you get older, you get plaque on your teeth, right? And what you want to do is to take off those plaque. And of course, there's a Nobel laureate, Yamanaka, who actually identified 4 factors that can remove this plaque. And it's now been used in regenerating, for example, in making cells younger. So we're no longer in the anti-aging phase. We're now in the reversal of aging phase because of these findings. So there's a epigenetic clock test. It's called the Horvath clock. It's either saliva or blood, right? And it can determine your actual time, your actual chronological age versus your epigenetic age, meaning how much crud you had accumulated in your epigenome, right? And the thing that they have not released is actually what's called the Grim Age clock, which is a little bit more portentous, right? It's a little scary because they used AI to superimpose the data of smokers, and they found out that they could actually predict accurately in a normal person when he would have his first heart attack or when a cancer is probably going to occur, to the year that it's going to happen. So of course, it's hard to release those kinds of data, but there's such a clock already exists. Now, the one benefit that I see with this is really of these clocks is really very simple. Since I give you your protocols, right? And you could see that, hey, I'm getting epigenetically younger. I'm removing more crud from my system and I'm feeling better. You could do the same for the drugs that are being given to you by your illness medicine doctor and say, look, I've been on this protocol for 5 years and I've aged 15 years. I've only been on the health optimization protocol for 9 months, and my age has decreased. My epigenetic age has already decreased, right, by 2 years or something like that. So these are the developments that I was looking at before that no one in illness medicine was paying attention to, right? Your sleep, your epigenome, your microbiota. We used to think that the microbiota, your gut, you have about 2 kilos of those microbes in your gut. And we used to think that they're separate from us. Now we know that they are an organ that grows inside of us as soon as we're born, right? And we have to take care of that gut microbiota because now we see that it's very, very much related to depression. And how is that? I recently discovered pathway is that the microbiota communicates with your gut. Your gut is considered the second brain, right? And your gut actually communicates with your brain, and it's a bidirectional communication, meaning the brain can communicate with the microbiota and microbiota can communicate with your brain. And it's now you see many studies showing the relationship between healthy microbiota and a healthy mental state, versus those that have anxiety or depression. And you can, with the same tests, as I said, the metabolite testing, right? Testing the metabolome, we're actually testing the metabolites in your poop, in your stool. It can be tested from there, right? For your vitamins, it can be tested in urine, right? To do that. And also in urine, you could correlate the levels of neurotransmitters in the brain. Like, for example, before you had to actually insert a huge needle in the brain and do a biopsy and take out the levels of the neurotransmitters. But now you could correlate the levels, right? And if this is how much of the metabolites are in your urine, this is probably the level of dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, etc. in your brain. So we have those systems now to do that.
I wanted to slow you down and ask quickly about sleep. You skipped over that. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Matthew Walker, who wrote the book Why We Sleep, and it really made me take my sleeping much more seriously. I had always kind of known that was, for me, the single biggest factor around my mood, my cognitive clarity. But after just reading some of those studies, it made me think, wow, this is something that I need to really prioritize. What kind of sleep protocol do you recommend for your patients if they're trying to improve it? And do you ever recommend CBD? And if so, in what? How do you think it's the most effective to use CBD for enhancing sleep?
Kyle, when I started this practice, before I even started teaching other people, I devised a technique called the sleep anchoring technique, right? The sleep anchoring technique is, of course, I'm guilty of violating it because before the pandemic, I was traveling. I was rarely in the same time zone for 2 weeks at a time. But if you're not as crazy in terms of your travel, etc., pick a time that you're actually going to sleep, right? This is my sleep anchoring technique, and consider the time as the first activity in your day, right? Because if you consider that as the first activity in your day, then you're not going to skip it, right? If you consider it as the last activity of the day, you will cut it short. So make it like in your scheduling, make it the first activity in your day is to sleep, right? So you anchor yourself to a particular time. The general advice that I give is number one, in terms of your last intake, don't sleep, until about after 3 hours of your last food intake, right? So when you finish eating at 7, the earliest that you sleep is at 10, right? That's because the gastric emptying time or the emptying time of the stomach is on the average about 3 hours.
Does
right?
that also go for something like tea?
No, this is for food, right? It's for food. Liquids actually flow in a lot faster. And if you have to actually, for some reason or the other, are forced to go to sleep early with food still in your tummy, etc., sleep on your right, because the stomach tends to, most of us, more than 90% of humans, actually, their stomach empties on the right side, right? So you're facilitating the food to actually exit.
So keeping your right side down on the bed.
Down, right. There's a few humans have what's called situs inversus, meaning the locations of their organs are all flipped. The liver is on the left and the spleen is on the right and so on. But those are very rare, right? So in general, it's a good, if you have to, I don't advocate it, is, if you have to sleep with food still in your tummy, try being elevated and a little to the right. And then your light, try to have for whatever benefits it may give you, is to have amber glasses or anything that blocks off blue light. And what you will notice there is this is 2 hours before bedtime, right? 2 hours before bedtime. You try to wear them, and you know what, if you try to watch television with amber glasses, you'll feel sleepy anyway. The colors are washed out, everything sucks. So then what I make my patients or clients do is actually I ask them to have a basket outside of their rooms where they deposit their cell phone. The bedroom is for sleeping, right? And it's kept cool at around 65 to 68 Fahrenheit. All black, and all of those LED lights, I ask them to put tape in it, right? If your partner is snoring, kick your partner out and have your partner sleep in a separate room. As you know, there are studies that show that they were testing the cortisol levels of partners with their partners snoring, right? The snoring partner, and it shows that for the non-snoring one, for each snore, the cortisol level actually spikes up. Even if you say mentally that you're sleeping better, because your partner is beside you, actually what your sleep study will show and your hormones will show is that you actually aren't having a restful sleep. The aside from the cool, other people would have they have magnetic blankets and so on. It's just keeping things very simple, right? The right temperature for sleeping, the right mindsets for sleeping. And that's the most difficult thing for people, is to turn their minds off. And so if you're watching TV or news, etc., right before, or scrolling, or even doom scrolling right before bedtime, you're not going to be helping your brain to actually shut down, right? For CBD, before I recommend CBD, I actually would recommend people to take a look at what their body uses naturally first to sleep, right? And there's this big misconception that melatonin puts you to sleep. It doesn't. Melatonin is a hormone that simply that simply signifies your body to rest. Right? It's produced right after sunset because its trigger is actually the onset of darkness. Right? It's produced in a gland called the pineal gland. For those of you who have taken ayahuasca, it's also where DMT is purportedly made. Right? So take a look at whether or not melatonin can help you rest. Right? And then you can induce. So there's relaxation first. You can also take some magnesium, for example, like 200 milligrams of magnesium. If it doesn't give you diarrhea, some people are sensitive to it, or take 100. And that can cause blood vessel dilation, right? So your body feels a little bit more relaxed. So instead of taking a Valium, you try the body's natural Valium, which is magnesium, right? It will dilate your blood vessels, feels you more relaxed. And then you can use valerian root, right? Or valerian root extract. And what that does is what's called induction. It induces your body to sleep. Right. And that's the most difficult part for many people is, they can't seem to get to sleep. But when they sleep, they sleep continuously. Now, the other problem is sleep maintenance. So for that, I usually give around 100 up to 200 milligrams of 5-HTP. 5-HTP is a precursor to your serotonin, right? And for many people, it helps to maintain sleep, right? So that's the issue with sleep. You have to give the body the proper signals or cues, and the biggest culprit, of course, is the way we're lit, right? Artificial lighting and not following prudent day-night cycle. For all of us. That's why I said that the first activity in your schedule should be sleep, so that you make it a priority. And then make sure that you have all the proper environmental signals that will make you sleep. Make sure that you're giving the body the proper signals that it's now about to rest, right? And then if you are finding all of these difficulties, try to see whether or not you could provide natural measures that the body uses in order to sleep. Now, you should also know sleep patterns, right? The sleep patterns, the average sleep cycle is about 90 minutes, right? Or an hour and 30 minutes. You have about 4 or 5 of that a night. So you either have 6 hours, 7 hours, 30, or so. And I would recommend that if because you will sleep shallowly in between those. And the way I found mine, I'm very average when it comes to that, is by keeping a journal, because you're going to be easily arousable, right? You can wake up easily when you're in the in-between cycle state. And what you don't want to do is that if you have an appointment in the morning, is to cut yourself mid-cycle, meaning in the middle of a REM sleep or in the middle of your dream. You will feel like shit the whole day. It's as if your truck has run over you if you are woken up in the middle of a dream, and I generally don't recover from that the whole day. So what you do is if you are already awake, an hour before you're naturally awake, an hour before your appointment or so, wake up. Don't stay in bed. Follow your natural cycle. Again, there's a lot of individual differences in sleep. It's been discovered recently that there are actually genes that are inherited by people for less amounts of sleep. I think Barack Obama is one of those that needs only about 6 hours of sleep every night. So they are, they run in families, those that need sleep. But if you are going to hack your sleep, at least know what your sleep cycle is, so you could hack it properly. And if you lack sleep, there's no shame if you have time to take a nap in the afternoon. And what's a good nap like? And I actually like this technique is that if you are able to doze off, hold a key in your hand, right? Hold, say, your car keys, etc., and say you're dozing off in your chair. And at about the 20th minute mark, you're actually going to drop your key. And that's the signal for you to wake up, right? Because you don't want to over nap, so to speak, because you won't be able to sleep that night. But remember, in terms of sleep, there is no such thing as banking sleep, right? And there's also no such thing as getting over sleep deprivation. Your body has to deal with that. So that's my quick advice. If you'd have to take cannabis, I notice actually that pure CBD doesn't actually put me to sleep that well. The formulations that have been successful are those with a small amount of THC in them. Say, for example, the one that I found successful for me is something like that has at least like 2 milligrams of THC and 10 milligrams of CBD. Right. In fact, I'm formulating a product right now with exactly that because it works for me. Right. And in addition, I'm putting in some valerian root and other stuff that actually would calm you down. So that's my take on CBD and sleep.
Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah.
That was very comprehensive.
Because I'm after simple lifestyle hacks, right? If you want to hack your sleep, well, follow sleep at the same time every night. Choose a time to sleep. If you want to hack your microbiota, what's the fastest disappearing macronutrient in the human diet? It's fiber, right? So eat high fiber foods, which is really lots of green leafy vegetables, because the primary food of the bacteria in your colon, will be this fiber. Right? They will convert it to what's called butyrate, which actually the levels are correlated with colon cancer. If your butyrate levels are low, your probability of getting cancer is actually rises. Right? So the food that you eat actually becomes the environment for your colonic bacteria, and for me, just being able to get my patients and clients to eat more green leafy vegetables, avoid refined carbohydrates, and is usually enough to bring their levels, their bacteria to healthy levels. So you could see that all of these things are tied, into the metabolites that are produced. There are certain metabolites, for example, in the colon, like vitamin B12, right? That is not produced by the body; it's produced by the bacteria for you. So be nice to them, right? Give them food, and and so that's for example for microbiota, and for you, mitochondria, and I know your listeners probably have heard that this is a powerhouses of the cell, right? You have these are the batteries that give you energy, and they process your carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Proteins are rarely used to provide energy unless you're actually starving, right? And so the carbohydrates and fats are actually converted into the energy currency inside the cell called the ATP, right? And you have about 100 quadrillion mitochondria, and mitochondria, these are batteries. So they if you take a look at your nerve cells inside your brain, they have 1,000 to 2,000 of these. The average is about 500 per cell. The red blood cells don't have any, but before they grow to become mature red blood cells, they used to have one. They used to have mitochondria. What happened to their batteries? They get turned into heme, which forms your hemoglobin that carries your oxygen. So all the cells in the body have mitochondria, and even those that don't have them now used to have them when they were growing, right? And you've heard, everyone has heard about the ketogenic diet and all that kind of stuff, right? And really, it's all about when you mitochondria is actually, and your listeners might be surprised to know this, is that these are actually bacteria that are dividing inside our body. They have their own DNA. It's circular, right? And but they are responsible for the production of your energy. So the reason for example, medium chain triglycerides or MCT oil powder, you guys might have heard of that. And the reason why they're popular is that, for example, an 8-carbon chain, which is MCT oil, meaning it has 8 carbons, right? In C8, that can pass through the mitochondria. Mitochondria have actually 2 barriers. They have 2 membranes in them, and in order to shuttle a molecule into it, like a large, for example, fatty acids, if you're eating fats, right? You need acetyl L-carnitine. So your listeners would have heard of that. It's a chaperone. It's a molecular chaperone that allows the longer chain fatty acids to come in and to get burnt as fuel, right? So when you take C8 or MCT, it can basically just go through the mitochondria and become burned as fuel without necessarily requiring a chaperone, right? So when you're doing intermittent fasting, for example, or something like that, what happens is that in about 12 hours or so, your mitochondria will actually start a process called biogenesis, meaning they will produce more of themselves, right? But the analogy is like, if you give a kitchen so much food to cook the whole time, 24 hours, it will not have time to clean itself, right? So what you do is you stop eating. You stop eating for a while, at least 12 hours, to give them a chance to rest and reproduce and give you fresh batteries. So I actually 11 years ago, I started before it was vogue to do this. The studies came out that it's 12 hours, but I said, it's probably easier that, if you actually would like to follow to boost your mitochondria, etc. Like for me, my first meal is around 12 noon, and I stop eating at around 8 p.m. And that's daily for me, right? That's a daily habit that I do.
Do you microdose LSD before noon or at noon?
I microdose LSD first thing in the morning, man. So I have a better day. So it's just for your mitochondria. You take care of them by making sure of what they eat, right? If you shove a lot of carbohydrates to them, they will, of course, carbohydrates are like dirty gasoline, right? They will, when they're being processed inside the mitochondria, they will also produce a lot of rust, what's called antioxidants, right? Your vitamin A, C, E, these are all antioxidants. So you have to take care of those batteries inside your cell, and it's a simple lifestyle thing. If you know that you can replenish them or at least produce new batteries for yourself after 12 hours of fasting, why not do it? You're already asleep 8 hours, so just don't take anything else. So these are like inexpensive lifestyle hacks,
Very helpful. I appreciate the pragmatism around it. You mentioned that you journal consistently. A lot of people are so disconnected from their bodies and have been for so long that it's difficult for them to even accurately know how they feel. I've found that when I experiment with different diets and lifestyle choices, having a journal to be able to document those changes has been a really helpful tool. Do you have, how do you journal daily, and what has been the most helpful way to structure that journal for yourself to get accurate readings over time?
I actually, my lifestyle recommendations are usually what I go by in terms of my journaling, right? So I actually have the following entries according to my life cycle of the day. So sleep quality, right? I will rate my sleep quality. I have an Aura ring, etc. But I more rely more on how I feel. Did I wake up refreshed this morning? What were the factors last night, and so on. And so there's an immediate feedback to that. And then what's one of the first things that I do when I wake up in the morning is I drink a couple of glasses of water. What's my hydration status? We are becoming a more and more dehydrated society, and the body can be anywhere from 60 to 80% water. So what's my hydration status, and what has been. There are mornings when you actually will wake up. Sometimes if you don't drink enough water, is you wake up dehydrated and you will have a headache, right? So check your hydration status, and then the other thing that I put there in my journal is, of course, my food. What am I eating? What have I eaten? And what time am I going to eat today? Because for clients, I tell them, if you cannot control what you eat, at least control the time for me. So there's says, oh yeah, I can do that. I can control the time. And I also take a look at that. And the one thing that I encourage people to do is to know your sensitivity to foods, right? And I've been tested, for example, because sensitivity can give you something like you ate, say, egg today, and you have a migraine on today is a Monday, and get a migraine on a Wednesday. You don't even know that they're related, right? Until you know that this is actually a sensitivity matter, because the effects are long term, right? So that's the thing that I do with food, right? You take a look at its effect on you, not only today or a few hours after, but a few days later, especially if you don't know what your sensitivities are, right? And then I put in my movement, when movement, meaning your exercise, your activities today, there's just been this is an illness medicine journal. It was in JAMA, right? Journal of American Medical Association, like 10,000 steps of whatever intensity. It's 8 to 12,000 steps actually will reduce all-cause mortality, right? So did I do at least my 8 aside from my usual resistance exercises or my high intensity interval exercises? Did I essentially get around 10,000 steps, or how am I doing with my balance? Because as one gets older, you lose your sense of balance, right? So a simple way of doing this, I'm 59, and I put my socks and underwear and everything on standing up without holding anything, right? And I also have a balance board in my living room because my nephew is actually a surfer, and like I said, I don't want to lose my balance as you get old. And the reason why you don't want to do that, lose that balance, is that the cause, one of the major causes of hospitalizations as you get older is really a broken hip, right? And that's usually from loss of balance. But they also found out, I do my chin-ups every morning. They also found out that it's not really from the fall itself, but the failure to grip, right? So the hand grip actually is also diminishes with age. And then from after movement, I check my grounding, meaning my electromagnetic frequency exposures, right? Because at night you turn off your Wi-Fi or whatever sources are there, and you also you also check your light sources and so on, because there are times when, say, you went somewhere you went somewhere even for just a short period of time, say between 7 and 7:30, you're assaulted with these fluorescent lamps from some establishment like a restaurant or something like that. immediately, you can actually register the effects of that in terms of how you slept and so on. So and then also make sure that a simple measure is to walk barefoot in the grass or in the sand. I'm lucky. I have aside from my place in DC, I have a beach place in Delaware. On weekends, I can actually, even in the winter, walk barefoot on the sand, right? And do that. So that's that's a check off on your activity, because that's discharging your ions, right, to the earth. I also have a grounding mat for those of you who don't who can't go to the beach or don't have grass or live in high rises. You can purchase a grounding mat that does that. And then the other thing that I write in my journal is my meditation, which is breathe well. How did I do with meditation today? Not only with the sitting meditation, right? But with the reminders during the day, right? That, you don't need to have an ego in order to function. The ego only arises when you're actually thinking about yourself, or you're engaged with someone else, because the identities actually form a boundary, right? But when you're actually working alone and so on, there's every hour on the 5 minutes to the hour, I actually do just I stand up from my chair. I do 3 to 5 minutes of elliptical while actually just being present, right? And so this kinds of things that you journal are actually part of the cycle of your life. As you do them, you're sleeping, you're hydrating, you're eating, you're grounding, and then how much sun did I get today? But for me, if I'm already in the winter, right? And I do have a UVB lamp in my place where I actually sun myself every day. And I have dark skin, as you see, and therefore I require a longer exposure, right? Sunlight, the genes for vitamin D is about 750 million years old. So it's older than the human species. So you could imagine how important that is for us, right? So, and these are the kinds of things that you monitor, right? And of course, you monitor, your irritation with your spouse, with your employees, with your friends, et cetera, and examine those relationships and where they are coming from. I have a dear friend who actually used my advice to him in an important speech in economic summit, and he said, a friend of mine advised me that when I wake up in the morning, before I yell at what the stock market is doing on TV, I should ask myself, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Have I pooped yet? Am I constipated? And so on, because we tend to blame other people first, but let's take a look at ourselves internally first, right? And so that's a kind of if you just
do you carry a journal with you throughout the day, and then are you marking in the time and the activity throughout it? Is that the way it's structured? I want to give people a real kind of simple structure if they want to do this in their own life.
Yeah, you know what, guys? If you are a fan of free stuff, like I am, and you know how to use a spreadsheet. The simplest way is to create a Google spreadsheet and just put this in, and then put the dates up, and you could see, because you could clearly see from the table, the amount of sleep they had and your perceived effect on you, right? So you could see, and you could do the comparisons. So, at the end of the day, before you go to bed, right, is where before your day begins with your sleep, right? That's when it only takes like 5 minutes to just jot things down in that. Sometimes when everything is hunky dory, you can just copy an entire column to the next one. So it's really not that difficult, right? To do it if you want to quantify. And that's what I want to express to people is that there are two things. There are things that are advisable for you, right, at your age. What's good for me is not necessarily good for you, right? Because our constitutions are very different. It's not like giving an antibiotic, right, where it should work on everyone else. So my levels of vitamins, minerals, cofactors are strictly mine, and therefore I will respond very differently to things that I give it. And if you meet friends, say, "Hey, Kyle, try this. Mucuna pruriens. It raises your dopamine, blah blah blah," and you find like, it doesn't have any effect on me. Right? It's because you actually don't need it, right? So it's all of this, N=1 advice, that hey, this is good for me, this might be good for you, and so on. The results are really very varied when you are trying to recommend supplements, and because that's dependent on the levels and that's dependent on age, right? In fact, one of the things that I hate the most is when you read magazines and that say, the best abdominal exercise for you is this. And, I ask, what age? Right? What age are you talking about here? But you will agree with me, Kyle, when I say this, when there's like a 25-year-old who's strutting around and saying, "Oh, I have my six pack and my chest is this, etc., etc." And I go, "You really should look like that at your age. There's no excuse." So, and try to maintain that as you get older, because as you get older, beginning at age 30, actually, if you're not careful, the process of losing muscle mass already starts, right? There's a phenomenon called sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass, right? So that's what I advise you to do, is to do something simple, a simple checklist. When you fly airplanes like I do, you have your pre-flight checklist. And so it's just like for you, before you go to bed, it's like for me, you go off to fly off to dreamland. That's your pre-flight checklist, meaning, yeah, this is what I got during the day. This is what I should expect tomorrow.
Sure. So we've talked about psychedelics a little bit here, and we've been going about an hour, so this is the last subject I want to get into. I've noticed you mention the ego a number of times throughout this conversation. You seem to be very keenly aware of your own ego and your relationship to it. You also seem to be very keenly aware of quantifying things. So on a day like today, when you are microdosing, how do you quantify your relationship with your ego?
It's like this. I have a saying, Kyle, which I hope your listeners will take. It's to measure your days not by the goals that you meet during that day, but by the amount of time you were present for each and every activity, right? So a real presence. Like an example I could give you is that, for example, your daughter or your son is asking for your time, and you're just there, scrolling through your phone and half answering your son. That's not being present, right? So yeah, you may have ticked off the father-son relationship box here, but you were not fully present, right? So that's the way I like to see, is how present am I at the current moment. And for me, the definition of ego is actually, it's laden with a lot of subjective inferences, right? Because in general public, it's one sense of self-importance. So I tend not to use it. I tend to use the phrase self-referential system, right? It's a self-referential system, and neuroscientifically, it's actually an illusion, right? It's an illusion in a sense that I'm not saying that it does not exist, right? All I'm saying is that it's not what it seems to be. When your brain starts processing, for example, your autobiographical information, it cannot help but form that illusion that there's an agent there. There's a you inside. And in order to function, it's there because it has an evolutionary function, right? It protects you. It separates you from other people. The more you are with other people, with other people, right? The more that boundary becomes. But when you're alone and when you're meditating or working on something, you don't need to engage it. It doesn't need to get engaged. And one of the things that microdosing helps with, whether it be with LSD or with psilocybin, and that is that the goal, if I may say so, is for you to be able to watch when the ego arises, right? But how does that translate, right? How does that translate to in practical terms? Because people say, hey, well, that's too abstract. So in very practical terms, it's really very simple, right? How are you reactive to things or are you responsive to things? When you react, it's a knee-jerk thing, right? So when someone says, Kyle, how can you do that thing to me? You selfish SOB, blah, 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 blah. You see your ego rise and that whole thing becomes your identity, right? Because there's no space around the recognition that the ego is an illusory part of you, right? So it engages, and that's reactive. So, but when you are responsive, the first thing that you will see is that this person is actually acting from his place of ego, right? Of his ego identity. So how could you do this to me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you see that that's a person's ego actually barking you these things, right? And then you respond instead of reacting. You don't get caught, right? Your emotions don't get caught in the accusation, et cetera, and you're being to respond. And you can say, I'm sorry to feel that I've done that to you. So you, instead of being immediately combative and fighting off someone, you could see where the person is actually coming from or saying these things from. And you could also see where you're coming from. And that's when basically a practical way of understanding when your ego is arising. You see it like you want to be the immediate thing that you want to say is like, fuck you, I never really blah, 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 blah. But as soon as it arises, you see that it's actually an egoic response, right? There is someone getting hurt, right? When there is someone there, then you know that the ego is up, right? I'm not saying it's bad. It's just that we have to recognize when it's arising within us, right? And then we act appropriately.
Yeah, there's a big difference between feeling angry and acting out of anger.
Yeah, and realizing, the point. Your inflection point really is being able to see the anger arise. And that's, for me, the equivalent of seeing your ego arise, right? Being able to see the anger arise and you go, oh, there's the anger, right? And that's a practical way of understanding, when people say kill the ego, etc. No, it's not, there's nothing to kill. It's an illusion. It's the way, the way the brain functions. It's an illusion of the processing of the brain, right? The processing of the brain is called the mind. And when I ask people what the definition of the mind is, they couldn't seem to answer. So there, I'm giving you a simple definition. It's how the brain functions. So and with the processing of the brain, it will produce illusions. For example, you see visual illusions like the Kanizsa triangle, for example, or the vase and the face illusion. That's from the processing of the brain. And so the ego is the same way. It comes around from the processing of the brain, and it seems like that's why I say it's not what it seems, right? It seems like there is someone there. There's a sense of agency that someone is actually in control. right? That someone is doing all of these things, and that's why that the teachings in the ancient teachings, for example, like in the Bon and in Dzogchen, etc., the element of surrender is really very important, right? You surrender to the present moment, and that's that's one of the hardest lessons to actually do, is to surrender to the present moment, whatever it is. You surrender to your anger, you surrender to this, but you're always aware of what's going on, right? You're always aware that these are just appearances in consciousness, right? That's the big training that you do in meditation anyway, right? When you sit down and meditate in the morning, many of your listeners probably do. For me, the big training that you do there, is being able to see the contents of your consciousness as they arise. The sound that you're hearing or what you're seeing, arise in the same space as where your thoughts and emotions are. They have the same, in fact, in old teachings, the thinking is regarded as a sixth sense. And as a neuroscientist, these are all just like electrical signals in the brain. It's just like, your thoughts of anger, etc., is the same thing as what you're hearing or seeing there. They're just all electrical signals, and that's how. And your subjective experience of them, right, is just an appearance. So when you're looking at the ego, etc., it's just another appearance in consciousness, right? But that's the whole point. Is that it's really difficult to get to a point where you're able to identify the contents of your consciousness, identify these contents of consciousness, that they are not you, that anger is you. But very well when you get fucking angry, that the whole anger, that whole electrical activity just takes over your entire brain. And, suddenly there's a Kyle who's angry, who's screaming and yelling, right? Instead of, it's just something that arose, right? Like sound, or like something that you just saw. It just I liken them to like there's a balloon generator, and they just it just at random, just all these balloons just flow, and there are your thoughts, your emotions, and so on, and being able to observe them, right, is actually the skill, quote unquote, that you want to develop. And so when your ego arises, when your anger arises, when your reactivity arises, etc., you can observe it as it arises and act accordingly.
Hear, hear. Well, Dr. Ted, I want to be respectful of your time. I don't know if I mentioned this prior, but all of my guests get a free surf lesson. So if you ever make your way out to California and want to hit the waves, the offer is open.
In Santa Cruz, you mean?
In Santa Cruz, or I'm down in Los Angeles a lot as well.
Oh, okay.
Have you ever tried surfing before?
Yes, I am miserable. I'm I was in the Philippines, and I was getting lessons, etc. And I said, this is the most pathetic I've ever been in any one particular activity. So,
well, we can see it as a practice of observing the ego.
Yes, it is. It is because, I think because I had the wrong attitude towards it, right? Because in Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, I saw one December where the waves are high, etc., and there were these kite surfers, and they were just so beautiful to watch. And I said, before I die, I want to do that. And I said, well, maybe I'm too old to do that, but
Well, if you ever make your way out to the West Coast, the offer is open. Dr. Ted, where can people check out more of your work if they would like to learn more?
Yes, for health optimization, medicine, and what it does, you can go to homehope.org. That's a nonprofit that I started actually last year to teach doctors and health practitioners, who are not necessarily doctors, like nutritionists, gym coaches, etc., to have something in terms of being able to take care of their clients, right? And then that's at homehope.org. And for the cognitive enhancement or nootropics or brain boosting compounds that I'm creating, it's at transcriptions.com. That's TRO it's like prescriptions, but with TRO. We have a couple of products in there. Blue Canatine, which has methylene blue, cannabis, CBD, actually, nicotine, and it's essentially increases your focus, right? And then we have a pure methylene blue, and we're coming out soon with other cannabis products, like one for sleep, as you mentioned earlier, one for sleep, and one for anxiety, and one for pain, right? Because cannabis is known for its for those kinds of properties, but we're putting them together with other natural substances. We're exploring molecules like molecules of kratom. I know some of your listeners may be familiar with that. We're also exploring molecules of kava, and so on. So we're pushing the envelope in terms of what we're trying to develop at Prescriptions, but I hope it helps the people that they were intended to, because they were supposed to be complementary to each other, right? When I see clients, I cannot balance your nutrients and hormones immediately. It takes about 3 to 9 months to do that. So if you're in pain or you can't sleep, etc., we need to be able to offer something that will work for you. So join us there.
Thank you so much for your work. I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's Kyle again. Head over to trendswithbenefits.com and sign up for our newsletter to get weekly stories about psychedelics, adventure, and well-being.